We're live.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Speaking Up series oration of the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I'm the president and the chairperson of the Board of Directors for International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. As we go today, we'll be having a very important lecture. Are you able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
So this is our logo. And on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee of the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, I invite our audience worldwide for this Speaking Up series oration. Before I introduce the speaker, a little bit about ICHRRF, International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, is a US-based nonprofit focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom all over the world through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on educational research, legal and human rights advocacy, and charitable purposes, and we strive to be an advocate for the human rights and religious freedoms of underrepresented community across the world, including the United States. We believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about rights of only a specific set of people. A just and humane world necessitates fair treatment of all living beings. Our focus is on rights of indigenous communities and their freedom, free speech, and their cultural preservation. But in a sense, we at the ICHRRF strive to be the voice of the voiceless. Some of our initiatives include monitoring violations of freedoms and sanctity of religious and philosophical minorities across the world, research into documentation of the culture, history, and challenges faced by such communities, policy recommendations on human rights, religious diversity, and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments, collaboration to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the world. And we have a Professor Ved.P. Nanda Memorial Fellowship Training Program, and we are recruiting fellows for training. We do have an annual ICHRRF conference. The third annual conference is scheduled on October 10th and 11th at George Mason University in Virginia. This is the flyer for that particular conference. And the title of that two-day conference is Atrocities on Women. And our today's distinguished speaker is also going to talk about similar kind of issues. So it jives. The title of today's presentation is Abduction, Forced Marriages, and Forced Conversions of Girls from Ethno-Religious Minorities by Sonja Dahlmans, who is based in Netherlands. And of course, you'll be seeing, but this is a picture. A little bit about Sonja. She has multiple master's degrees, MA in theology, MA in theological studies of Islam. She had a pre-master's experience educating Orthodox Christianity. She did her BA in education. She's an expert gender-based religious prosecution and child and forced marriages. She's a theologian both in Islam and Christianity and has 10 years of experience writing and researching on the abduction, sexual violence, forced marriages, forced conversions of women and girls from certain minority groups under Islam. Ms. Dahlmans has also presented on this topic before in the United Nations during a committee meeting and before other organizations. She is author of a book called Coptic Solidarity, a latest report on trafficking of Coptic Christian women in Egypt, and speaks on what women empowerment means and argues that the word only pays attention to victimized women in war-torn regions only and not during so-called peacetime. Again, a picture of our distinguished speaker. A little bit about the topic. In recent years, these abductions, forced marriages, and conversions of girls from ethnic religious minorities, primarily in Islamic societies from the so-called WANA or the MENA region of the world, has gained international attention. WANA stands for West Asia, North Africa. MENA stands for Middle East, North Africa. This is a medieval practice still continuing historically into modern times. Unfortunately, these practices have been imported into countries in the Western Hemisphere also. Among the many factors behind it, this webinar will explore theological basis in a particular religion. Our distinguished speaker believes that these gender-targeted practices should be considered crimes against humanity. After her 45 minutes lecture, there'll be Q&A session from our audience. Again, this is our speakers speaking on Coptic Solidarity book. This is just about the people we talk about. So this I got from one of her presentations. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Speak up and judge fairly. Couple of housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Kindly change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our distinguished speaker. Questions will be taken only after our distinguished speaker is done with her lecture. Please send all your questions and comments by chat room. Please be very specific and precise in your questions. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves on the video camera will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questions, please. This event is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website as an educational resource for the future. Those audience members who request a certificate of attendance, please contact Christina Boozer. The email is here. And finally, we request all our US-based audience to donate and financially support ICHRRF. The links are there on the website. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to give the platform to Sonja Dahlmans. Ma'am, the platform is yours and you're welcome. Kindly unmute yourself. You're muted.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Dr. Ajijanji. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Perfect pronunciation.
Great. Very well. Thank you also for Carl for all the pre-discussions we had prior to this meeting and for the invitation. And to all of our guests, thank you for joining us. Carl, would you be able to share my presentation so we can start?
Sure. 1 second.
Thank you.
Is it visible now?
I can see it. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, as you've heard, today I'm going to talk with you about gender-specific religious persecution, very often called short-term GSRP, and combined with that, forced Islamization. My master thesis in Christian theology was on abduction and sexual violence committed against Christian women from the past and today. My master thesis in Islamic theology is on forced and child marriage. That's a little bit of my background, and I'll explain during the talk what these two important issues have to do with each other. Could you please give me the next slide? Yes. So before we start, yes, I am very well aware of the sensitivities regarding this topic we are talking about. And before I even dive into the issue of GSRP, I would like to address these sensitivities. As Christian Persecution Watchdog Open Doors, they have annual gender reports. In one of their gender reports wrote, GSRP is complex, it's hidden, and it is violent. What do we mean by that? Complex because it is not just one motive. So it is not only religiously motivated. We'll address that later. But religion most certainly is part of it. It is hidden because most of it happens away from the public eye. For example, many in the audience will remember that in Nigeria, years ago, in a little place called Chibok, predominantly Christian schoolgirls were abducted by an Islamic extremist organization called Boko Haram. And these girls, almost 300 of them were taken. And after that, we have not, well, some of them were freed, but while they were in captivity, they were hidden from the public eye. So GSRP is hidden. We do have some other forms of GSRP. One might remember, because we have seen this in October 2023, when predominantly Jewish women were raped in public, were sexually violated in public by Hamas, for example, at the Nova Festival. And it is violent. So there is rape, but also gang rape of women and girls, sex slavery. You might remember what happened to the Yazidi community in Syria and Iraq under ISIS, girls who were trafficked, who were bought and sold multiple times. We know about torture, for example, a community you may not be aware of, but there is a Muslim minority community living among others countries in Afghanistan. They're called the Hazara. And these women tell, for example, about people, Taliban, trying to suffocate them by means of plastic bags over their heads. They speak about needling, so being pinched with needles. We're talking about beatings and lashes, as the Chibok girls, the Christian girls that were abducted by Boko Haram, were talking about. We know about a young Christian girl in Pakistan who was fastened with a chain for, I think, 5 or 6 months while she was raped by multiple men. So it's very violent. And then there's also starvation, part of this. And with starvation, for example, again, Nigerian Christian girls, the Chibok girls, have told after they were freed that during their captivity, they were deprived of food to try to force them into conversion, Islamic conversion. We also hear this from other groups, that this is happening. So these are the things we're talking about. As you see and can understand, this is very dark. Then there is a tendency, specifically in the secular world, I think, to not necessarily acknowledge the religious part of gender-specific religious persecution. We are in denial of that. We try to silence it because we feel uncomfortable. Very often we feel uncomfortable talking about it because we have learned that religion is always hijacked and it cannot be a motivating factor in itself. But, and I think one of the main reasons is also that we politicize rape. Very often we find rape important when it is a group either on the victim side or the perpetrator side we condemn or we sympathize with. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, the Yazidi community that was, targeted by ISIS. A Dutch journalist, Brenda Stoter-Boskelo, wrote a book, and she titled the book The Forgotten People. Recently, here in the Netherlands, where I'm based, the Dutch broadcasting company NOS actually had a video out to explain to people who the Druze were, because we don't know these communities. So identification is a very important part of whether we sympathize with a group of victims or not. And another aspect of that is, for example, what we've seen with the Jewish victims on, the atrocities committed by Hamas against them. Often when we criticize a state, for example, in this case, Israel, we find it difficult to sympathize with the victims of rape. So that is why I call that politicization of rape. This happens to several communities. We now see this also with Alawite women. This is a Muslim minority group living in Syria's coastal areas, who have, and I am in close contact with that community, and they have shared several stories. I have now above 100 verified accounts of women and girls who were targeted, who were abducted, sexually violated. There's talk about forced marriage there as well. And because we connect them with the former regime of Bashar al-Assad, we now, for some reason, call these women Assadists, as if that explains or excuses the atrocities committed against these Muslim women. This is the case, and I draw the line, I just think rape is wrong, and it should not matter to us, to any of us, what religion or ethno-religious community they belong to. And then another important aspect is accusations, and that often is also political motivated, but also in recent years, people who try to speak up about these things have been accused of being racists for addressing the religious part of it. We've seen this in England, in the United Kingdom, with the so-called grooming gangs. People who were speaking up, trying to speak up about these crimes, were targeted, accused of being racists. That does not have to be the case, although I do recognize that sometimes, and we need to be aware of that, yes, the extreme right does run with stories such as these, and that is why I think it's important that we do speak about it, that we are honest about it, and make sure that it doesn't, that it won't be used by such political parties as part of their, agenda. So these are the sensitivities that I recognize, and I am in no way judging Muslims, because I always treat people as individuals, and I don't judge people based upon their religious, ethno-religious background. I do, however, believe that in cases of rape, sexual slavery, torture, etc., we as responsible adults in the world, we need to speak about these things, and we must make sure that these things will not stay hidden anymore. Could you please share the next slide? Right, well, having said all of that, what do we mean when we speak about gender-specific religious persecution? What we are talking about is separating men and women and children from each other. We have seen this, maybe some of you in the audience, I'm old, so I remember, in the 1990s in former Yugoslavia, in a little place called Potocari. Muslim men and boys from 13, 14 years and up were separated from the women and children and were murdered brutally. That is what we mean with separating men and women and children. During the Armenian genocide, this also happened. Men and women during the Armenian genocide, and also what the Assyrian community calls the SIFO, because not only Armenian Christians in the Ottoman Empire at the beginning of the 20th century were targeted, but also Chaldean, Aramaic, Assyrian, and Greek Christians were targeted. So separating men and women is and children is what we mean by that, and then treat them, regarding their gender. Targeting women and girls strategically. This is done very often to shame and humiliate the group they are part of, the ethno-religious group they're part of. And Abu Annalga wrote with regard to the Yazidi genocide that the bodies of women and girls are used as tools to shame entire communities. This is not a new phenomenon. This is something we already read. I'm an expert in the early church. I'm a patristic exegete. And this is what we read also already in 3rd century early Christian martyr texts. So that there was the knowledge that these women and girls were targeted to shame the entire, in that case, Christian community. It is used, GSRP, also as a tool of genocide, again, going back to the Hazara in Afghanistan, for example, preventing women and girls from having children by, very extreme rape, gang rape. We see this also with in China, with the Muslim minority group, the Uyghur Muslims. You may have heard of those people. They are an ethnic religious group, and there is sexual harassment of these women, but there's also stories of these women being is neutralized, sterilized, an English word. So preventing them from having children. This is what we also have seen with the Yazidis in Syria and Iraq under ISIS, but also, and this is broader, because this happened as I've just explained with the Yazidis, but this also happens in countries such as Egypt, Pakistan, India, and other places where girls from Hindu, Sikh, Christian minority communities are forced to marry Muslim men, and according to Sharia, when they're married, when they have these children are now Muslim and not Hindu, Sikh, or Christian. So in the long run, the Geneva Convention speaks about slow genocide, specifically in Pakistan, where the Christian and Hindu communities are already in such small numbers. Abducting the women and girls from a fertile age and force them to have children with Muslim men, and these children then become Muslims, is a genocidal tactic in my view. And this is also what I've argued at the UN when I did my presentation there in 2023. And we need to be very clear on that. GSRP can also include public nudity, again, shaming people, sexual assault, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced marriage, and as I've just explained, prevent birth. Can I have the next slide, please? So what makes gender-specific religious persecution religious persecution? Well, first of all, the victim group. Women and girls are targeted due to both their gender as well as their ethno-religious identity, as we've seen in the SIFO, the Armenian genocide, with the Yazidis and other groups, as I've just explained. With the rape and the forced conversions, there's very often derogatory names for women and girls from these religious minorities. Yazidis being called devil worshippers, other women being called kufr, unbelievers. Or in the case, for example, of the Alawite women, Rawafid, meaning the rejectors of what the Sunni Muslims consider the rightfully guided caliphs. So there's a religious connotation there. Forced religious conversion to Islam, as I've just mentioned, it happens in Egypt, in the northern part of Nigeria, it happens in Pakistan. And I also want to highlight, and this is why I said forced religious reconversion, that Christian persecution watchdog Open Doors mentions sexual abuse also aimed at Muslim women who converted to Christianity, and forced reconversion to Islam in there is what I'm talking about in their case. The girls who, for example, were taken captive in Nigeria by Boko Haram, the so-called Chibok girls, have stated that they had hours every day of Quran study, that they were forced to wear the hijab or a niqab, so forced Islamic dress code. We also hear this from Yazidi girls, and that they were, when they were freed, these women, that one of the ways that they celebrated their freedom was by taking off and burning their niqab or hijab. So this is what makes it religious persecution, specifically on the victim side. But also we know from, for example, ISIS and Boko Haram, and I will address that in the coming slides, that they view these women, you know, as a target due to their ethno-religious background. And I will cover with you some of the things that they have used to morally justify their deeds. Thank you, Carl. Can I have the next slide? Yes. So why does it matter to address this issue, and specifically the religious side of it? Well, we need to understand what is happening, specifically with the at the moment, the wars that are going on in the Middle East, North Africa, armed conflict in these regions, but also, as I've just previously addressed, what is happening in Afghanistan, what is happening in Pakistan, in India, in other places in the world you may not hear that much about, but these things are still happening. I'm sorry that right now I don't have yet the knowledge to speak to you about another group, an important group, and that is the Baha'i. And they are in Iran and Egypt, and I think it is Yemen. I'll learn more about that from a young woman from that particular community in September when we have a meeting planned. But I want you to know it happens to them too. I can't give you any details right now, but the fact that I am not mentioning them further in this presentation is because I don't have the data yet. It doesn't mean they're not there. We need to be able to define this complex problem, because then we can take action and make also legal changes in international law. What do I mean by that? International law has made huge steps. It has, from the mid-80s, beginning of the 90s, it has acknowledged sexual abuse, rape as a weapon of war. That is good. Unfortunately, much of our international law is aimed at individual human rights and not necessarily group identities. So women and girls who are targeted due to their ethno-religious identity, the group they are part of, can be therefore ignored or just not seen, because in our view, much of these human rights are individual rights. And I believe that the Article 18, the famous article on religious freedom in the Declaration of Human Rights, actually does not express the word persecution. It does express religious freedom, meaning I as an individual have the right to go to church, the mosque, a temple, a synagogue. But most of the time people, as with, for example, the Armenian genocide, are targeted because of their ethno-religious identity. And it is not necessarily forbidden for them to go to, you know, as an individual, to go to church, a synagogue or a mosque or whatever house of worship you prefer. So that is very important. I'll hopefully start my PhD on this specific subject, and this is one of the things I've already discussed with my supervisor, that I think that we need to address this. Yes, Carl, can I have the next slide, please? So where does gender-specific religious persecution happen? As you may remember from the introduction, I argued that yes, it happens in war and armed conflict, but it is a wider problem. So, for example, Islamic extremist groups in Syria, we are now seeing HTS, Tahrir al-Shem, being in control of Syria. We see that other groups, the SNA, ISIS, all other sorts of extremist groups are still active, and they all point to each other, but we do know that women and girls from religious minorities are targeted. We see this in northern Nigeria, not necessarily a war zone, but there are 12 so-called Sharia states in the northern part of Nigeria. And this is Nigeria, for those of you who don't know that, is roughly divided into a southern Christian part and a northern Islamic part. It doesn't mean that people from other religions don't live there, but that's just roughly speaking how the country is divided. And then there's this region they call the Middle Belt. So the part of Nigeria in between these Islamic northern and southern Christian part. There's a lot of attacks. If you hear about attacks in Nigeria, very often that is in this middle belt of the country, with states as Plateau, for example, or Borno. Then the northern region, the northern part, is the Islamic part, and this is the part where many Christian girls are being abducted, and this is also where Chibok lies, so where the girls that we were speaking about earlier on during my presentation, where they were kidnapped. It happens in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. Cabo Delgado is a very dangerous place. A lot of violence happening there. You may not hear about it a lot in the news, but a lot of it is happening there. You can say actually, in general, gender-based crimes are very high, the percentage of gender-based crime in this particular part of the country. And on top of that, also aimed at women and girls from other religious minority groups. We've seen this in Israel, Gaza. I mention it because of the fact that many of you are probably aware of what happened. And as I've mentioned, the Hazara, for example, in Afghanistan. So this is by the Taliban, Israel, Gaza, obviously Hamas. And then in Islamic countries, and specifically in those countries where there's, when minorities are already marginalized and discriminated against. So it doesn't happen in every Islamic country, don't get me wrong, but specifically in those countries where there's already a problem with marginalization and discrimination against religious minority groups, then you will also see that women and girls from these groups are being attacked, abducted, raped, forcibly converted. And this is in general, this is not specifically a problem with GSRP, but in general, very often when it considers rape, when it considers sexual harassment, very vulnerable girls and women are targeted. So this is one of the problems that also happens when we speak about GSRP. Thank you, Carl. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I've promised you before, just to give you some idea about, the way these people morally justify what they're doing, how are these women and girls from other religious minorities viewed in the eyes of these extremists? Well, Boko Haram said to a Christian woman, "You're no longer in Nigeria. You are now in an Islamic kingdom. Here, women's rights are respected. Not like in Nigeria, where women are made to work, farm, fetch water and firewood, and where you have all types of discrimination." So, where women are discriminated, he meant. "This is the reason why we are rescuing Christian women like you. In our Islamic kingdom, there will be no discrimination because everyone will be Muslim." You may have heard of the term Boko Haram, meaning that they are against Western education. Some of you may remember this because there was this hashtag that our one of the previous first ladies, Michelle Obama, she was one of the people who stood up against the atrocities that were committed against these Christian girls. And there was a hashtag called Bring Back Our Girls. You may remember that. It's about 11, 12 years ago, I think. And also Mrs. Clinton spoke up against this using that same hashtag. Well, that idea that, we have to save certain beliefs, certain culture is what this man is referring to here when he says here women and girls are not discriminated. So here you don't have to work or fetch water. Here you can be a woman, whatever he means by that. Thank you, Carl. Can I have the next slides? In Egypt, this is the research, the report that I wrote for Coptic Solidarity, where I did lots of interviews with women and their relatives, victims and relatives of victims. And I'm aware of the story of Amani, an 18-year-old girl. I'm in constant contact with her family. She's a young Christian, Coptic Christian girl. The Copts are the largest religious minority in Egypt. There's also other smaller groups like the Baha'i I was just referring to previously, but also these evangelical Christians, Greek Orthodox Christians. And there's also Coptic Catholic Christians, by the way, but the largest group are the Copts from the Coptic Orthodox Church. This young girl, was pressured to break all contact with her family, marry a Muslim man, and in his word, that marrying of a Muslim man after converting to Islam was for her own benefit and protection. So we're helping you. One of the things I found when I did my research on the situation in Egypt was that all victims, not one excluded, broke all contact with their family. Am I claiming that you cannot voluntarily convert to Islam? No, of course not. We have the same issue, by the way, in Pakistan and India, where it is said that, oh, but they all want to elope with a Muslim man. It happens. Of course it happens. But what we're talking about here, specifically what we will discuss later when we address the issue in Pakistan, is minor girls, 12, 13, 14-year-old. In Egypt, also very young girls, and what does stand out is the fact that they no longer, and we're talking about hundreds of girls, no longer want to engage with their families at all. And if one or two girls do that, that could be the case. But if every victim breaks all contact with their family, that is suspicious. When I visited the US State Department last June, they also asked me about this. They questioned me about this after reading my report, and this is also what I answered them. Can I have the next slide, Carl? ISIS, so the Islamic State is Iraq and Syria. They also go by the name, you may have heard of that, Daesh. Anyway, they have, believe it or not, a magazine, and it is called Dabiq. And they argued in that magazine that it was permitted for them to enslave and sexually exploit Yazidi and Christian women and girls. and they frequently quoted from the Quran to justify their deeds and to their victims. And they would call these girls, Yazidi girls, sabaya, meaning a sex slave, spoils of war. This is also the term, by the way, that was used again to refer to Jewish women by Hamas in October 2023. They call these women kufr. For those of you not familiar with the term, it means unbeliever. Obviously, it means a lot more, but let's just go with that. It's easier. And Yazidis were referred to as devil worshippers. Very derogatory terms for these women. And next slide, please. As I said, this is also a problem. So GSRP is also a problem with women and girls from Muslim minority communities. For example, the Hazara in Afghanistan, according to some reports, Taliban are much harsher on women due to Hazara women due to their religious identity. And I've also heard stories of rape from these communities. And this is also a historical issue. During the 19th century wars, the abduction and rape, sexual abuse of Hazara women was already also a problem in Afghanistan. Currently, and again, Alawites, also a historical issue. Discrimination, marginalization of Alawites also happened during the Ottoman reign in that region. But we also hear today stories of abductions, forced marriage, rape. And this also is the case with Druze families. I have 5 verified cases of the Druze women and girls from that community. I hear stories from Christian communities, but most of them currently from the Alawite communities in Syria. The Druze, by the way, are not necessarily Islamic. I'm just saying this to give you a complete picture. But this is what is happening in Syria as we speak. And I'll refer to that when I'll give you a little more detail about the breeding ground after the next slides, please, Carl. So speaking up about these things is really important. This is, although, as I said in the beginning, at the beginning of my presentation, luckily, it's a good thing that the United Nations, that the International Commission of Human Rights and Religious Freedom, as I'm speaking for today, that they address these issues. It's very good that we do that we speak up about these things. Unfortunately, in the media, these situations are still, these atrocities are still underreported. And may I add that one of the problems is not necessarily only the underreporting when it happens, but it needs following up in the media. For example, what happened to the Yazidis is not solved. 2,600 women and girls approximately are still missing today, and very little is done to get them back to their families. And I think that is wrong. I think we need, when you're a journalist and you write about it, make sure you follow up. Talk to these people 2-3 years after, and see what they have to say. Unfortunately, as I said, it's political. Unfortunately, it's made political. So we focus on one war, one armed conflict, and neglect another one. And I think, for example, the Hazara women in Afghanistan are victim of that focus. Another group that I've mentioned in relation to the Armenian genocide is the Armenians. It's not just a historical problem. In 2023, just 2 weeks before October 7th, in a region called Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, that was a predominantly Armenian inhabited region. When finally these people were ethnically cleansed from their ancestral homeland, I have seen myself online Azerbaijani men saying that they were offering 5,000-6,000 American dollars to, and I'm quoting, "get me a hot Armenian girl so she can taste some of my Azeri DNA." Recalling for these women the horrific crimes their grandmothers and great-grandmothers have been subject to during the Armenian genocide. So these things are still happening, but the focus of the world was already gone to other areas. And that also has to do with other political issues, I think related also to oil and money. But, you know, I don't want to make it too political. We have a prejudice very often. As I said, you know, to sympathize, we need to very often to feel empathy with groups, we need to identify with them. That is, I think, very common with all of us human beings. That is why human interest is used in journalism, to make you see a more personal side of, for example, you know, the suffering during armed conflict. But it can also happen that, for example, in the case of Jewish women, if you don't like what the state of Israel does, if you don't like their politics, we can then not focus too much or deny the rape of these women. On the same hand, if you are pro-Israel, you may be aware of the fact that Palestinian women and children are in IDP camps that are camps for internally displaced people. That is what it means. And we know for a fact that women and girls in IDP camps actually are not safe. I don't say that's a general rule, but I know they have not been safe in some of these camps. We know this from Nigeria. We know this from other places. We know, for example, Yazidi women in Syria and Iraq don't even dare to come near these camps. So this is an issue. And if you are supportive of, for example, one side, you may miss the vulnerable position the Palestinian women and children are under in these camps. And, you know, that is what I mean with prejudice. We choose sides. And I would argue we don't. You know, that is one of the Yazidi women who said rape is wrong. Can we at least agree on that? Because otherwise human rights become very arbitrary. Now, as I promised you, I would close with breeding ground. And one of the things with breeding ground, war is some, you know, situation where a lot of rape unfortunately happens. It doesn't mean that it is only in war, as I've explained during this talk, but it happens. And we need to be aware of that. It's acknowledged as a crime of rape in itself, where it in the past was considered, you know, just a byproduct of war. So it's a good thing that we now acknowledge it as a problem in itself. Breeding ground is when people, like in Pakistan, like in Nigeria, like as in Egypt, other places, are already marginalized. As I've explained. But there's another thing. I want to take you back to Idlib, Syria, prior to the fall of the Assad regime. We already knew that the people now in control, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, short HTS, was committing crimes, rape, raids, confiscating of properties of Jews and Christians, executions, public executions, dress codes for women and girls, child marriage under the Syrian National Army and HTS was already a problem in Syria. Women who didn't obey, you know, what they thought were proper dress codes were punished in public. Girls were not, as we've also seen with the Taliban, allowed to go to school. It already happened. So it should come as no surprise that when they gained power of the entire country, it even got worse. And this is also what I mentioned when I was in the States, when I was speaking with, representatives from the US State Department and others. I also mentioned this because this is something where we I think as little as we can prevent such atrocities, this is where it starts. Recognize the breeding ground and act when it is still a minor problem before it actually gets worse, as we're now seeing in Syria. And I'm afraid a lot more will come out from stories from refugees that are now in, for example, Lebanon and other places. So I hope I've given you some perspective on what is happening, what we are talking about, what we're dealing with. And yeah, I'm open for your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Sonia, for a very comprehensive presentation. At ICHRRF, at various time points, we have covered these issues. So we are not silent. We recognize it. We are not politically diffident to speak the truth. As we said, we are the voice of the voiceless. And that's why we are organizing this conference on atrocities on women, not necessarily during the wartime. So I can assure you that ICHRRF will continue to raise its voice on this issue, whichever country in the world it happens. You mentioned several countries, and looking at the comments and chat in the chat room, there is some mention, there are always time limitations. There's a very specific country that has not been mentioned in your presentation as well as in the international media, and that country is Bangladesh.
Correct.
Bangladesh, it's ethnic cleansing, cultural genocide, and the same atrocities on women that you have mentioned in Syria, in Egypt, are ongoing. Unfortunately, the ruler of that country is winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. So that tells you the irony, geopolitical hypocrisy about it. So we don't want to leave Bangladesh without mentioning. Also in the African continent, you did mention about, Egypt, but again, there's a country by name Sudan, where in the Darfur region, as well as prior to partition in South Sudan against the tribal animist Christian women, rape was used by the majority Sudanese Islamists. So
And
this
also,
is
if
not,
you allow me, in Burkina Faso.
yes. So there is a text-based theological sanctions for some of these behaviors. And I think time has come for the world to open the eyes and not be politically correct by shoving the things under the carpet. That is what is happening. With these comments, I will start taking selective questions because there are a number of questions. I don't think we have time to address everything. There's a question from Mr. Mohinder Gulati, who has worked with the United Nations, and he is asking you a very specific question. In your research, have you come across GSRP committed by non-Muslim groups, like Christians, like Buddhists, like Hindus, or Jains? There may be some specific incidents, but are there any instances of more general or a large-scale use of GSPR by these non-Muslim religious groups?
Yes, unfortunately, in Yugoslavia, with the wars, when that country was falling apart, we have seen on a massive scale the rape of Muslim women. I worked in that region for a few months as a volunteer. And that also has, and I'm not excusing it, don't get me wrong, but that also has a history. This is something that we sometimes also see in other parts, where people sometimes take revenge. And so when Muslim communities rape women and girls from other communities, then those men sometimes go and, do the same. And this is why we need to speak up, because otherwise it just will repeat and repeat and repeat itself. But in general, generally speaking, most of what I have come across to answer this gentleman's question is by Muslims against women and girls from other religions, or as I mentioned, Muslim minority groups, and also combined very often with the forced conversion. Is that clear?
I think you have made it amply clear. And there's a question from Mr. Clemens. Is there a correlation between cultures that still practice or allow child marriage and cultures that practice abduction and ethnically targeted sexual violence?
Yes, we addressed this when we were talking previously. I didn't have time, I was watching the clock. Yes, one of the things I argued, thank you for reminding me, Carl, is I argued this also when I was invited to speak in during a congressional briefing in Washington, that I see a clear connection between regions where child marriage is a problem and the abduction of minor girls from other religious minority groups. For example, in northern Nigeria, there is a huge problem with child marriage, and we see the abduction of girls, Christian girls. In Pakistan, is a huge problem of child marriage, and we there also see the abduction of Hindu, Sikh, and Christian girls. We see this also in Egypt, for example. Child marriage, as I mentioned, under HTS and the SNA in Syria was already a problem. And we now also see the problem of abduction, and we've previously seen it with the Yazidis and Christians. So in my book, there's a very clear connection between the two.
There's a question from Mr. Dirkling from Germany, and he's asking, when these girls or women are released from captivity, is there any medical support or, any kind of rehabilitation to them when they get free?
Yes, unfortunately, well, I'm glad they do it. But unfortunately, for example, the Yazidi community, the diaspora, is occupied with a lot of, aid on the ground in these countries. Because as I mentioned, there's actually very few people have been punished for what they have done to the Yazidis. The people that were trialed and punished, convicted, were convicted due to taking part in a terrorist organization, not necessarily for the genocide on the Yazidis. So, and also I know from a Christian nun that Yazidis need to pay ISIS money to get their own daughters, nieces, sisters free. So baby steps, but the community itself is doing a lot of work. And I think, if you allow me, go to visit one of their websites, for example, Free Yazidi International, Yazda, and see if you can, help them if you have anything to spare, because they are very much left on their own. Also with, as I addressed, finding back these girls. With regard to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as you rightfully added, and these countries in that part of the world, very little can be done often because, and this is why the forced conversion is so important. Very often when these girls are forcibly married and they are freed, in that case that their marriage is annulled, their religious conversion stands. And we know of Hindu girls being targeted by Muslim mobs when they wanted to return to their Hindu family. We are talking 12, 13, 14-year-old little girls. That is an issue. So even when the community wants to give them the aid that they so desperately need, some of these girls actually have been put in orphanages, because according to Sharia, a non-Muslim parent cannot be the guardian of a Muslim child. And this girl now is a Muslim child. I was invited to speak in Sweden on behalf of another organization in July. And I spoke about this because they invited me to speak on what the correlation between gender-specific religious persecution and blasphemy laws is. Well, here you have it. So unfortunately, I only had 45 minutes. Otherwise, I would have been able to tell you a lot more. And yes, this is a very important issue. Thank you for raising it.
There's a question from Kofi Sarpong, who works with ICHRRF. And actually, you have alluded to it that, Palestinian women do not feel safe in the IDP camps. The question that is troubling us, who are the perpetrators? Is it the Israeli soldiers, or who are the people who are committing sexual atrocities on the Palestinian women in the IDP camps?
Well, I think I said that they don't feel. I said we know that this can happen in IDP camps. So I don't know whether, they feel unsafe or not, but it's one of the things I acknowledge happens. As to your question, one of the problems nobody speaks about, I wrote an article about this years ago, is that gender based crimes in Palestine, way before this war with Israel, were already sky high. Yes, and that was not by Israel, although the UN blamed Israel for it. As crazy as it was, they did. And the whole situation with Israel was apparently causing Palestinian men to hit their wives. Not my words, that was the UN. This is the problem. And this is also what I mean with domestic abuse I'm talking about. This is also the problem, what I mean with breeding grounds. So when you know that this is already a problem, when these women become even more vulnerable because they're now living in IDP camps and there's no men, perhaps they're men, perhaps they're widows, perhaps these children are orphans now, they are even more vulnerable. And may I add that Palestinian men were among the men that bought women and girls from Yazidi and Christian communities from ISIS and took them to Palestine. Also something if I had more time, would have addressed. So I hope I addressed your question, but yes, so this is what we're talking about.
We are kind of already over our time, but there are multiple questions that will have to wait for some other time. Some of them are on UN hypocrisy about the Gaza-Israel war and lack of UN condemnation about Hamas's atrocities and things like that. There are some comments about the Balkan situation, which was not simply religious, it was ethno-religious, and there were multiple parties to it. So although rape was used as a weapon and how horrible it was less sectarian, more ethnic or tribal kind of thing between Croats and Bosniaks and Albanians. And depending upon what ethnic tribal group you belong to, so primarily it was not Muslim versus non-Muslim, but more like ethnic tribal kind of identity that was used as a war crime. So we need to be kind of clear about that, but we universally condemn any gender targeted violence, whether in peacetime or wartime. So that is our message. I am highly thankful to Sonja Dahlmans. I hope you will continue to work with us. I hope you will come to our annual conference in October and make a presentation there. And I'm also thankful to our audience members that on a Sunday morning in US and whatever time they are joining from Germany or whatever, India or whatever place they are joining from, taking time off. I think it's a noble gesture. At least you want to learn about these human rights violations. So as shameful this chapter is, this still continues. And we have to be very, very cautious about it. I may add to our viewers that even Western societies, there are pockets when these kind of practices are implemented. So just because you are sitting in United States or Canada or Western Europe, it's not that you are safe. Our speaker mentioned about the Rotterdam gangs in England. So there is no immunity. It's a question of group identification and, majoritarian domination over ethnic minority women or religious minority women. That is what the whole issue is about. Thank you very much indeed to everyone who joined and to our distinguished speaker. Let's give her a round of applause for her forthrightness, truthfulness, and to address the issue bluntly as it should be done. And we shall take leave, but the recording of this program will be available on our YouTube channel and our website. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.